Hi, everybody. This is Dr. K from Holistic Minds. I'm very proud to be introducing Dr. Shidlofsky, a brilliant neuro-optometrist who is actually on the board for the Neuro-Optometry Rehabilitation Association, NORA, who's also in private practice in Texas and is faculty on multiple different universities. And this man has accomplished so much that it'll belabor the point for me to list it all. But he is actually one of the people that has helped create a lot of the systems, if you want to say, within this area of neuro-optometry. And before I butcher anything or mess anything up, I'm going to hand it over to the man himself and have him basically introduce himself and tell us a little bit about you. Dr. S, as they call you.
Yeah, as he said, I've been in practice for 30 years in a town called Plano, Texas. It's a city just north of Dallas. Let's see, I basically have been working with children and adults who have visual processing issues. And that can come from developmental issues such as autism, ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, or it might be someone who's had a traumatic or acquired brain injury or concussion, something of that nature. But then, of course, you get the little mix-ins also that, you know, people who have had other types of genetic disorders and things of that nature. So sometimes you get that mixed in Lyme disease, infectious disorders that can affect the neurology of the visual system, but really the overall neurology. And then we also work with a lot of sports teams. So we work with some professional teams, and what we work on is enhancing vision skills to make the athlete have that competitive edge. Because we don't think, we think about the eyes when we talk about sports, like hitting a baseball. We think about the eyes you have to see the ball to hit the ball, right? But we don't think about making our eyes more efficient in their use. So it becomes easier. And if I can improve the reaction time a quarter of a second, how big a difference is that? So sports vision is something we also do. Well, the last area we specialize in is myopia management. Myopia is obviously a disorder. And when I talk about myopia, I'm talking about nearsightedness, okay? The rate of nearsightedness is increasing dramatically to where by 2050, they estimate that 50% of the population will be nearsighted. And,
wow.
And to be able to to get this process to slow down or even stop at an earlier age becomes very important, because when you have myopia at a later age, as you get older and if you have higher myopia, what ends up happening, you put your retina at risk for retinal issues such as retinal detachments and things like that. So we got to catch these kids young, get them to slow down, and then we can kind of hopefully prevent them in the long term from having retinal issues. So really, those are kind of the areas my practice is involved in, and I have fun every day doing it and helping people and helping them get better. We have our primary office, as I said, in Plano, but we also have 2 satellite offices. And also I have the honor, as you mentioned, of being the Secretary Treasurer of the Neuro-Optometric Rehab Association. I'm also a founder and Vice President of the International Sports Vision Association. And I'm also on the board of the International Functional Neurosciences and Rehabilitation Organization. So for some reason, people keep picking up the phone and calling me and asking me to do things. I have a really hard time saying no. I do that every now and then, though, so that's good.
Well, you're a man of many talents, clearly, and you know, I'm just so happy to have you joining us. Can you let's zoom all the way out? Can you help our audience better understand just visual processing? Because you touched on that in the beginning. Because, you know, one of the things that I see a lot of is this thing of, well, my child was seen by the pediatrician or my child was seen by the ophthalmologist. They have, you know, they have 20/20 vision. What are you talking about visual processing?
Great question, and it's a really important question, because oftentimes, I'll use autism as an example. You can have, I will tell you, a large percentage of the kids I see who are autism spectrum have 20/20 vision. Is that where the vision evaluation should stop? No, because they have other types of visual issues. So when you go in and they check, gosh, your eyes look healthy and you're 20/20, they've completed about half the exam. But that's a full exam to most. You have to look at what you do with your eyes in your day-to-day life. So what do? We go to school and we look at the board and we look at the book and we look at the board and we look at the book. We're going distance near, distance near. If that system's inefficient, don't you think it's going to affect them? Absolutely. It's going to create a learning problem if they can't focus up close. Yeah, it's going. So then we're going to read a book. So what are we doing? We're making eye movements, right? Okay, so we have to make sure the eye movement is as efficient as possible. My biggest age for new patients with learning problems in school is about 8 years old, because you go from learning to read to reading to learn. Mm-hmm. So you go from a position of reading each word to scanning across a page. And if their ocular motor system's inefficient, they're not going to be able to do it. Okay, and then you also have the person who has an eye turn, or even if it's an intermittent eye turn, or like something like where an eye that turns inward or an eye that goes outward. Oftentimes we can remediate things without doing surgery. Okay, now I'm fine with surgery, don't get me wrong. I refer for surgery when it's needed, but many of these cases that they're doing surgery with can also be remediated by a good course of vision rehabilitation or vision therapy to help them utilize their eyes more efficiently. So when you talk about visual processing, what we have to look at is eye tracking, eye teaming, accommodation, and visual spatial skills. Those are really the 4 things we look at.
Now, the last part of what you mentioned is really interesting, because, probably 5-6 years ago, I've gotten smart enough to understand that visual tracking, so the kids that have, these skip lines, they have trouble reading, I was smart enough to identify those. But I've been humbled to realize, even with that, how many cases I was missing, because there's a whole domain of depth perception and visual processing where children need to use their eyes to orient themselves to space. And the children that I see, a lot of them are clumsy, or they constantly bump into things or whatever else. How does that fit into the picture of how the child experiences their life through their eyes?
Well, the very last thing I said that I really didn't comment on was visual spatial skills. Okay. And oftentimes visual spatial skills are misinterpreted as depth perception. But depth perception is very much a very central visual process. Your eyes have to be pointed at something to have depth perception. For instance, most people think parking a car, let's use that as an example. Is parking a car a process of depth perception? Absolutely not. It's a process of visual spatial skills, knowing where you are in space. Okay, so when I talk about visual spatial skills, so you think reading across a page is visual spatial skills. No, you're reading black and white flat paper. Your eyes are pointed right, hopefully are pointed right at it. You have depth of where the book is in space, but the process of going through the pages is a visual spatial skill. Now, let's take it a step further. When your system goes into stress, its natural response to stress is to collapse space. If you ever played tennis, you've experienced this. You're playing tennis and you're waiting for a ball. What do you see? The net, the lines, the player you're playing against, and the ball. But if you chase hard after a ball, what do you see? Just the ball. Okay? Mm-hmm. So what you've done is collapse space to that ball. And if you ever thought about it, that ball seems smaller. Okay? This is how we're neurologically wired to deal with visual stress. So if I'm having trouble reading, okay, am I in visual stress? Absolutely. So how am I going to respond to it? The way I'm wired to, which is collapse space, which is why kids skip lines. Okay, they can't scan across the page because they go from word to word, or part of a word to part of a word to part of a word, but they don't know where the next word in space is. So they will tend to lose space.
Wow.
So it's this visual spatial skill that really becomes the key. The interesting thing about visual spatial skill is where most of your eyesight, your 20/20, if you will, is mediated by the visual cortex back here. Much of your visual spatial skill comes from your brainstem. Okay, that's where it integrates with your other parts of your body. Okay, your your kinesthetic system and your proprioceptive systems and information from your spinal cord. That's where it's getting the information, and it's done instantaneously because your brainstem, as you know, is responsible for your automated activity.
Yeah.
Right. So it's part of that automated activity center that helps us give us balance. So balance is 3 components to, right? There's tactile, touching the floor. There's visual, and there's vestibular. Okay. So we have to take that vestibular. This is why I've been doing balance testing for 20 years as part of my vision exam, because if I could figure out a way to alter their center of balance, I could figure out what's going to help them read better.
Huh. That's crazy. So that's crazy to hear. I mean, it's not crazy that you're doing it, but it's something that no one would ever think about. Can you expand on that? So what exactly do you do?
Well, there's a couple different ways I do it. The first thing I do is I have a hallway in my office and I have them walk and I watch them walk. It's a very simple skill. It's observation skill, but I watch them walk. Do they lean forward? Do they lean backward? Do they walk off to the right? Do they walk off to the left? Okay. Is their head down? Is their head up when they're walking? Okay. So observation is one thing I do.
So how would that show up? So for instance, what you're touching on is really interesting because I just had a patient this last week, a little girl who tiptoes and she kind of leans forward as she's walking. Right. And I told the mom, I think she has a visual processing issue, and we just kind of let it be for now. So when you make these observations, what does that tell you about the child's brain and how it's processing?
Well, it tells me that what they're doing is they're compensating. Okay, they're creating a compensation for an imbalance in their visual processing system. So really, I see that posturing as a compensation for the information they're taking in visually.
Mm-hmm.
So I can actually put certain types of lenses on them that alter that center of balance. Okay, and by altering that center of balance, oftentimes our handwriting improves instantaneously.
Wow.
Improves instantaneously, and it's a passive therapy. I'm using this as an example. And they may need other things that may be more complex than just that. But sometimes we can use lenses as therapy and alter the skill almost instantaneously. And how do I know this? Because I can do that platform test. So what my other test I do is called posturography. So I put them on a platform that measures center of balance. Okay. First I do it with their eyes open, and then I do it with their eyes closed. And then I put them on a foam mat with their eyes open and eyes closed. And what I'm doing there is isolating the components to balance. So on the foam mat with the eyes closed, primarily I'm testing vestibular. On the foam mat with the eyes open, it's primarily visual. On the firm board with the eyes closed, it's primarily tactile. And the firm board with eyes open is everything. Okay? So I can go through that process, and the computer reads what's coming from the platform as to where their center of balance is. And then I could put different types of therapeutic lenses on them and see how it alters that balance instantaneously.
That's amazing.
So I can use that science to say, okay, if I put this type of lens on you, your balance is that much better. So it helps me to make a decision on what type of lens I should utilize as part of the therapy.
That's brilliant. That's amazing.
So that's one little thing we can do. But in fact, sometimes we'll bring it back and we do active therapy. So it comes to our office and we're with our therapists. And one of the very first things I work on, before I work on anything with actually moving the eye, I work on vision.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Because if I don't get their visual spatial skills in space, I can't expect them to their eyes to move effectively in space. All right, so there's a hierarchy to how we treat it. So I'll do visual spatial skills, monocular skills, binocular skills, perceptual skills. Okay, and that's how I'll rebuild their visual system. Because if you're going to rebuild something, you build it on a good foundation. Okay, so I start with the foundational skills first and build on them.
That's incredible. Are there tests that parents can do at home? So we touched on like how the child walks. Are there other things like just having the child close their eyes? Like how would a parent know that their child has these issues?
Well, There's a couple simple things you can do. You can take a popsicle stick. Everyone has access to one of those, right?
Okay.
Maybe you put a sticker on it, of something the child might like, and you just move it side to side and have them follow it and watch.
Okay.
Okay. And if they're above 5 years of age, let's say, they should be able to move it pretty smooth, relatively smoothly, and without head movements or without significant head movements. If they're watching the popsicle stick and they're moving and they're doing fine, that's great. But if they're going like this and then moving, their whole body's moving and their head's moving, that tells you they probably have a tracking problem. And then you can take 2 popsicle sticks and go side to side like that, and look at the picture on this one and look at the picture on this one. If they're going like this, you see it, they're probably having a visual processing issue.
Wow.
So that's one thing you can do. The second thing is you take that same popsicle stick and put it out at a distance, like arm's length, and you bring it toward them, and you watch their eyes converge on it as you bring it in. And if most children should be able to bring it in with an inch of their nose and what'll happen is when it hits about an inch, one eye will kick out. Your non-dominant eye will kick out because you lose the ability to maintain it. And 1 inch is fine, 2 inches is fine. But if they're losing it at 6 inches, 8 inches, that tells me that system is not doing what it should be doing, what it's designed to do.
Amazing.
So those are some simple, I call it the popsicle stick exam, but that's something parents can do at home just by watching their eyes and watching them do the task. They can say, "Oh gosh, this doesn't look so good," or this may be worthy of an evaluation by a neurodevelopmental optometrist, and seeing what we can do to help that child.
Brilliant. Brilliant. One of my poor man's tests, and I'd love your comments on this, is also just asking how well, organized the child is in space. So the children that are constantly bumping into furniture, bumping into walls, they're clumsy. That's one of my poor man's questions of if the child has.
Absolutely. Actually, in my office, what we have I call it developmental questionnaire, and that's one of the questions that's on there. How do they move around space? Do they bump into things like that? I ask those questions. It's kind of like, I don't think of it as a test, but then again, case history is the most important test doctors do.
Yeah.
Okay. There's not one single test a doctor does that's more important than case history. We know, you and I know that.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So it's certainly part of the case history questionnaire that we'll use is to find out if they're having trouble with balance, if they have trouble, what subjects do they like in school? What subjects don't they like in school? That can give you a lot of hints.
And how would you, so I have my own ideas. I would love to hear from you in terms of the subjects. Which subjects would be a flag to you of like the child having an issue?
I hate reading. I like being read to, but I don't hate reading. Okay. So for some people, math is really hard too, though, because if they have poor organization, they're going to have a hard time with math. It's not because they don't have the mathematical skill. It's just they can't organize things on a paper that need to be organized to maintain the straight numbers.
Wow.
Okay. I asked them about handwriting. Okay. Can they stay within the lines? Especially the younger kids. Or they write uphill or write downhill. So let's talk about handwriting for a second. There's really 2 components to handwriting. The first component is the grip, right? How we hold our pencil or how we hold our pen is the grip. Tighter grips sometimes will have a heavier print, things of that nature. Looser grips might be a little bit messy, but having the proper grip or having the proper handle on the grip, the two finger grip versus a 1 finger grip or what have you. So that's part of it. But the second part of it goes back to what we talked about a little bit ago, visual spatial. So if their grip is good, but they still have lousy handwriting and they write uphill and downhill, they have poor spacing between their letters, poor punctuation, oftentimes a visual spatial problem. Because they don't know where in space to write the next letter.
Wow.
Okay, so they tend to write all over the place, or they might write very large print or very small prints.
Wow.
So if they have an unusual printing pattern on a handwriting sample, and I will do a handwriting sample on many kids that I see, I'll watch how they organize on the page. And I can tell from that, okay, this child needs help with visual spatial skills.
Wow.
And it's really very specific to that.
That's incredible. And I'm sure there's going to be so many people watching this, so many parents that are like, oh my God, that's my child.
That is the case. Everyone knows somebody.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so happy to be having this discussion, because it's really about getting this information out there. Because over time, I've realized that there's nothing that is by accident. Everything has a reason. And these things that you're sharing with us, I think, are so profound, because there are children that have these issues, but the imbalances are not just tied to reading and writing, right? It's not just math problems. Their entire nervous system struggles.
Exactly. And, I think we can look at a few factors here. Obviously, in looking at the functional medicine aspect of it, obviously these kids have immune systems that are having a real difficult time. Many of them have immune system issues. And I was telling you before, I have genetic issues. People have methylation issues within genetics, can also have some of these issues. And then to me, something that you and I discussed prior to us getting on was neuroinflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And what effect does neuroinflammation have on the ability to process things visually and otherwise, for that matter? How does it affect other things?
And how do you see that effect? Because, it's funny that you say that. I do think most of these children actually that I see have a small or large degree of neuroinflammation. And I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Terry Walls.
No, certainly know of her, yes.
So she is our nutritionist, because I honestly think her diet is probably the most perfect diet that could have ever been created, especially for these children, because of multiple things, including how it influences inflammation, neuroinflammation. But
right.
How do you see inflammation affecting the brain, which then affects the eyes, which then affects how we experience the world?
Well, there's no real simple answer to that.
There isn't.
Inflammation can affect everything that we do. Neuroinflammation, and so I think from that perspective, obviously how efficient our neurologic system is can be affected by it. How frequently we get headaches can be affected by it. How we respond to certain foods that we eat can create neuroinflammation. We do have a nerve that connects our gut to our brain called the vagus nerve.
Yep.
And so we can eat certain things that create neuroinflammation. So if I was to simplify it the best way possible, it creates inefficiency, neurological inefficiency, excuse me. And by creating neurological inefficiency, you're going to affect the visual system in a big way, because largely the visual system is part of the brain. Okay. So if we can clean up some of those aspects, then we can also make the visual system much more efficient. And then once we do that, then we have to break the old bad habits and develop the new good habits. Okay? And that's where therapy comes in. Because therapy, we can do that. We can break these old bad habits that we develop the new good habits.
Great. So it's basically like neuroinflammation kind of causes the short circuit in multiple parts of the brain. And part of what I'll be sharing with the audience and other talks and presentations is how it does that. But one of the short circuits it causes are in the visual processing areas of the brain, which kind of causes a misfiring, or let's say poor connection, if you want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's in a nutshell. We have this, and really even beyond that, a miscommunication between the visual processing areas and the other sensory processing areas.
Huh.
So then you come into the whole concept of sensory processing disorders, okay, and how they're all interwoven and interconnected. And we realize the brain is not a linear system, it's a network system, right? So if I create inefficiency in one system, I'm probably going to have some inefficiency in the sensory motor system. I'm probably going to have an inefficiency in the auditory system. And what do we create? We create a child that really struggles. Okay? So the vision system doesn't act alone. The vision system has cohorts, and largely that is, you know, the vestibular system, the auditory system, and the other sensory system, the tactile system, the proprioceptive systems. So if something's affecting one system, chances are it's affecting multiple systems.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, I'm happy that you touched on this because I estimate, so kind of speaking globally, you know, of all the children that I see with severe behavioral challenges, anxiety, OCD, you know, whatever you want to label them, at least a good 30 to 40% of them have some type of sensory processing disorder. And one of the things that I have seen is inflammation modulate part of, you know, how much of a sensory processing challenge they have. So it's really interesting that you say this because I've definitely seen it play out. If a child, so you know, one of the things that the parents are trying to understand at the end of the day is, so let's say they've got the child with severe anxiety, you know, over the top anxiety, they can't take them anywhere, or the child has severe aggression or whatever other behavioral issues. How does a mismatch in the visual processing centers ultimately cause a child to have this over the top expression of angst or aggression or fill in the blanks? Like, how do the eyes and the way we process vision affect the rest of the brain and how we feel?
Believe it or not, we actually even covered this already, but I'll reiterate it. But basically, so when you have anxiety, do you have stress?
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Yeah.
So when you have stress, your system is going to respond to stress the way I explained it before. You get collapse of space, and you become hyperfocalized, and you become less aware of your periphery, and you're less aware of where the floor is, and less aware of where the walls are, and just what's in your central zone, and everything seems to bubble over, okay? And your system becomes overwhelmed. And when it becomes overwhelmed, what happens? You collapse even more. In fact, I've said for many years, autistic kids live in collapse space.
Wow.
Okay? Why do you think autistic kids stim in the periphery? It's not a behavior. It's a compensation. Okay? What they're doing is trying to stimulate their peripheral system by motion and peripheral retina stimulation. Because what does that do from a visual standpoint? What that does is open up space.
Wow.
Okay? That's why they don't work here, but they work out here. Okay? From a visual standpoint, they work in the periphery to help expand space. They're trying to help themselves. Yeah. And when do they stim the most? When they're stressed.
Yeah.
Okay?
So they're kind of lost in space in a way. They have no idea where they are.
Exactly correct. In fact, my running joke with parents is the typical child I see can see an ant on a sidewalk from 200 yards, but would miss the curb.
Huh. How? I think for a lot of people, you know, I've spent a lot of time trying to really comprehend what that means to be lost in space. For the parent that's never considered this, how would you help them be able to step into their child's shoes? Is it just, I mean, like, we could speak about it, and it's one thing. Is there a way for someone to get an idea of what life is like for a child like this?
Yeah, to make it, just to oversimplify it, but what I tell people frequently is to take 2 paper towel tubes and put it in front of their eyes like this, and merge the image together and walk around their house.
Huh.
And see how it feels. Because obviously you won't see where the floor is, you'll see what you're looking at. And that's it.
Wow.
So it's a simple way, but it can give them an idea of what it's supposed to be like.
So they just feel lost, but in their own.
But they don't know they're lost because they have no other experience.
To
them, that's their normal.
Every day.
Every day, that's their normal. And it could vary. It could be sometimes it's this much space, and then it's this much space, then it's this much space. When they're very relaxed, they could be much more wide open. Don't forget, the difference between a primary brain injury and a processing problem is a primary brain injury is going to be the same every day. Processing problem is going to change from moment to moment.
Wow. And that's just based on the stress that the child is under.
Right. More stressed, more collapsed.
Huh.
And
Wow. And, you know, this is something that's probably going to blow the minds of a lot of people who are hearing it, because this is certainly not a discussion that people hear often. And I guess one, why is it that so few people are talking about this? Because I see this as such a profound need, in especially the pediatric population. Like, I was shocked when I started really coming to understand what it is that you do. Like, why is it that pediatricians aren't trained in this to at least understand it? Because I know in my residency and all the education that I had, I never heard about it. It's sad that even in the holistic medicine world, most people have no awareness of the work that you're doing. And yet I see it almost every day now that I know to look for.
Right. Well, here there's a couple simple answers and a couple of very complicated answers that to answer the question fully. But and the first thing I'll say is politics. Complicated answer, because it's always complicated. But what it comes down to is, number one, it's not taught in schools. Okay, it's not taught in medical school. Okay, that you can change someone's visual processing. And unfortunately, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the ophthalmology organizations, because they don't know it and they haven't been trained in it, the problem becomes, well, this doesn't work because we don't do it. Okay, which I define as, if you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's unfortunate. Now, I do get ophthalmology referrals in my office, but it's from a few who maybe I saw a patient of theirs and I was able to help them, and so, okay, he's able to help my patient, so that's great. I'm gonna go that route. But unfortunately, the medical community has been very, very poor to understand what we do and how we do it. And we've probably not been as good at promoting it as we should be either. So I think realistically that's a big piece of the puzzle. I think, interesting enough, what's changed the game a little bit has been social media. We've been able to get the word out a little bit easier, a little bit more cost effectively, to tell people about what we're doing, how we help people. There's a great Facebook page called Vision Therapy Parents Unite. And it's made up of parents and a few practitioners like myself who partake in it. And Vision Therapy Parents Unite has been wonderful. They have, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 members now, and it's been a great Facebook page so parents can talk about how we can help the child. But unfortunately, the medical community has been very slow to grab onto it. And then the second factor is a cost factor, because it's not in the medical community. It's quite often not covered by insurance, and that becomes a problem. And it is a problem. Do I think it should be covered by insurance? 100%. Okay, but it's not being covered, and that's part of the travesty of it. However, the medical community's got, the more scientific research that comes out showing the effectiveness of this hopefully will change people's minds. But even when gold standard studies come out, they did one on convergence insufficiency, the inability to converge the eyes. Remember I was talking about with the pencil, or the popsicle stick moving towards your nose?
Yeah.
Convergence insufficiency. Gold standard study came out, and they're still denying it even exists. Okay, even though it was in their journal, it was in the ophthalmology journals.
Wow.
Okay, so once again, it's one of those things that it's time for people to start taking part in their own care. Okay, it's something I talk about frequently. I love it when a patient takes part in their care and they ask me questions, and I can answer their questions for them, or they seek some other answers elsewhere. Okay, it's time for parents to take part in their children's care, and I can't stress that enough, because if I had a nickel for every time a doctor said, well, that therapy doesn't work, we don't recommend it, and they come in and we make them better. Okay, so just telling a person it doesn't work because we don't do it, which is really what they're saying, doesn't really tell you anything. If you investigate it, you'll find out these therapies are highly successful, and we're able to help a ton of people have a lot more success in life.
Yeah.
It's all about, at the end of the day, it's all about quality of life.
Yeah.
But you know what? The interesting thing is we improve the quality of life of the parent too. Because if it's taking 2 hours to do 20 minutes of homework, if I'm able to even get it to an hour to do 20 minutes of homework, have I improved that parent's life? Yes, they have 1 more hour a day to spend on taking care of their other kids.
Yeah, and you know, it's extraordinary. I mean, everything that I'm featuring on Holistic Minds, everything that all the interviews that I'm conducting are really based on my own personal experience and the changes and transformations that I've seen. And I mean, sometimes the changes are so staggering that, you know, I'm shocked, you know, and I stand back and I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Because parents come back and like the child that was, you know, getting F's in reading, suddenly they come back and they're like 2-3 grade levels. Not only do they go from an F to an A, suddenly they're reading at like 2 or 3 grade levels above where they were. And this is all within like a 2 or 3 month period of time.
Right.
And, you know, I think it's these kinds of experiences for me, because the literature is important. You know, I try to pay attention to what's published and not. But one of the things that I realized is that not everything is published, and some of the information that's published is inaccurate. For me, my own personal experiences and the experiences that my patients have had has ultimately been the most meaningful and important and truth to me.
Truthfully, even gold standard studies have some skewing to them. There's just no way to make them perfect. And then the second point I'll make is when we're dealing with when you're doing a study on a medication that has a target, it's easy to measure it.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with the brain that has so many interconnections, it's very difficult to measure an outcome. So it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do a scientific study. And the second point I'll make about it is, since there's no drug involved in it at the end, what happens? The drug companies don't want to fund studies, and who's going to fund the study that's going to cost thousands upon, or maybe $1 million to do a study? Who's going to fund that study if no one's going to make money on the other side of it? You see what I'm saying? So the studies are, I have study ideas every day, and I'm academia and say, why don't you study this? Well, we have to have funding to study it. Okay. Yeah. So it's like a vicious cycle. We know stuff works empirically. Patients have had a lot of success. The grades in school, if you just measure grades in school, that would probably be a great study on its own. Here's where they are now. But the main point is that studies take money, and if you're going to put out money, there's got to be a net worth at the end for someone.
Absolutely.
And so and once again, dealing with the neurology of the brain and with all its interconnections, you can't really. It's much more difficult to target an outcome.
Yeah. Now, can you help us, I guess, speaking of the treatments, can you help parents understand what it is that you do? So you talked about putting glasses, or I guess prisms, in terms of changing the plane, but then there's also the therapies. How does this work to help retrain or?
So I break it down into really 2 types of therapies: passive therapies and active therapies, and they both work together. So, you know, you can do passive with active, active alone, passive alone. But and so basically you kind of pick and choose based on the individual's needs. But passive therapy is when we use lenses, prisms, tints, occlusions to create a therapeutic effect. And what I mean by that, if you were nearsighted and you put on a pair of glasses, that's a corrective effect, right? But if you don't have glasses, a prescription, a nearsighted prescription, let's say, or a farsighted prescription, and you put on a therapy lens, that's therapeutic effect. It's, first of all, it's temporary. You're not going to need it forever like you do a nearsighted lens, but it's also creating we're actually changing the brain. We're not correcting the structure. Okay, so let's think about that statement again. If you're forcing the neural system to make new connections,
okay,
that wire together, fire together, right? And we're starting to make neural. Those connections are permanent. So then I can remove what was helping us make the change, and then we don't need it anymore. when we deal with nearsightedness and we put a pair of glasses on, we are just correcting the asymmetry of the optics of the eye.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the difference is. We're instead of fixing a structural problem, we're fixing a functional problem.
So how would the lenses rewire the brain? Because that's something I don't think I've ever heard, and I'm sure most of our families would be like, say what?
You're creating stimulation to a nerve part of the visual nervous system that is shut down. Okay, when you collapse space, you're collapsing the periphery into the central, right? So when you collapse periphery in the central, the cells in the periphery are not being used as they should be, which give our visual system stability.
Huh.
So when I put light in there and I move light in space and I stimulate that peripheral part of the retina and force you to open up space, and I turn on those light switches, if you will, and all the light switches start turning on and you open up space, that's how you're rewiring the system.
Wow. So in a way, your glasses take the two-hole view, force the eyes to see everything.
Right. So that's your passive part of your therapy system. Now, the active part of the therapy system, where you'll come in and work with a therapist, and we'll work on, as I said, breaking the old bad habits, developing the new good habits. Okay. So so while the lenses might help them more expand space, we now have to feed that expanded space so it stays permanently, right? So we have to keep giving it food, if you will, or visual stimulation. So we do different activities that will stimulate that and so people learn how to control it, okay? If you don't know something's wrong, you can't control it. But if you can teach them when their system is not functioning well, and then teach them how to make it function well, then they can control the problem, okay? So so active therapy, we're saying, okay, this is when your system's not efficient. Now here's some tools that we can give you to help you maintain that efficiency. Okay, so what we're doing therapy is we're really creating that re-education of the system. In fact, I often talk about the 3 R's of therapy. The first is rewiring. Okay. Second is re-education, and the third is retention. Okay. If we make make a physical change in the eye, we're not changing anything, right? If we move a muscle, we're just moving a muscle, okay? But if we change the neurology of the system, what have we really done? We've created new neural pathways, okay? And by creating new neural pathways, that's the way your system's going to operate.
That's amazing.
Okay?
That's amazing.
So what I tell people when we do vision therapy, we're really not doing therapy on their eyes. We're doing therapy on their brain.
Wow.
Or neurological system. That's probably a better way to term it. We're teaching them activities to strengthen their brains to control their eyes better.
That's amazing. Wow. This has been incredible. Do you have other things you want to share with the audience?
As I said, I think it's really important. There's a couple websites you can look at to get more information on this. As I said, I mentioned on Facebook, Vision Therapy Parents Unite, great organization. They're not even an official organization, but a great webpage there. College of Optometrists and Vision Development is another organization of optometrists primarily that do a fellowship program for pediatric and developmental optometry. It's FCOVD.org. Obviously, the Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation Association, which focuses a little bit more on the brain injury side of things, but still there's a lot of crossover between COVD and NORA. I'm a fellow in COVD, but I'm obviously a very active member of NORA too. So the and that's NORAVisionRehab.org. If you're interested in the sports stuff, that's out there also. It's the International Sports Vision Association, and that's sportsvision.pro. So those are really some organizations that I think can give the public some information on some of the things that we're doing. And really how things are developing. And then, as I said, there's more and more websites and more Twitters and, Facebook and social media platforms that are all talking about this stuff. So, get on there, do some research, learn about it, and then go in and if you have questions, go in and have an evaluation and see what's said, and then you can make an educated decision on what's going to be best for you and what's best for your child, even more so than yourself.
Yeah.
That's really the best advice I can give, is keep an open mind, listen to your instincts, and you'll know what's best to do.
And, I think for many parents, what I've seen is once they go in and do the consultation, halfway through the consultation, their eyes are like wide open. They're like, oh my God, how is it that I have not known of this before? Because
Right.
I appreciate what you said. I think most parents intuitively know that there's something wrong, but they don't know how to follow their intuition because either they've been misguided or they don't know how to find the information. And through this disconnect, they're left lost. They don't know what to do to help their child. And that's part of what I'm trying to do through Holistic Minds, help parents make the right connection so they know whom to go to get the right care. And
Yeah,
I think
on that, 100% agree. I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So it's time, once again, time for parents to take their children's care into their hands and start seeking out these opportunities. There's plenty of opportunities for them to help their kids. They're gonna have to spend a little time and a little effort researching it. But I'll tell you, as I mentioned before, ultimately they're going to get back their time with major interest.
absolutely.
At the end of the day, as we make them better, as we heal them neurologically, as we get their visual system more efficient, as we get their auditory systems more efficient, what's going to happen is they're going to gain time back in the long run.
Yeah. And, for me, most importantly for these children is these children get their lives back.
Absolutely.
It's
the confidence. The confidence is huge. The difference I see personality-wise from the beginning of therapy to end of therapy is sometimes just overwhelming. I tear up because this kid was kind of folded up into like a little blanket, and now they're talking nonstop, and I can't get them to shut up. And they're talking to everyone that walks by them, and it's like, where did this person come from?
Yeah, and that's what makes it all worthwhile, right? To
Absolutely.
change the lives of these children and to see these little people blossom and flourish. Because for me, at least, there's no greater gift than to see, that child that was anxiety ridden, whatever, and now they're just transformed into a different child.
I 100% agree.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. I'm so appreciative of your time and the wisdom and just the gift that you've given us through this conversation. And I'm sure so many families will be also so appreciative of gaining this wisdom.
And thank you for what you do and getting the information out there. It's so important. Not just for what I do, but for what some of these OTs and PTs are doing, what some physicians are doing out there. It's such an important information. It's got to be out in that public domain so people can make these decisions for their families.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.